All right, thank you so much everyone for joining tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll be learning about the fair housing basics. This is mostly in the state of New York, so everything will be based towards that. My name is Amanda Ahrens. I am the Fair Housing Officer for the City of Albany. So the purpose today will just provide you with a few basics. Some things we'll go over. Is going to be the fair housing basics. What is fair housing? What do you have to do? What are some barriers? Also go over screening and the application process from a fair housing perspective. We'll go over what is considered a disability, what is reasonable accommodations and modifications, and how do tenants request them. We'll go over assistance and service animals. And lastly, we'll go over victims of domestic violence status, what their protections are. And then we'll go over additional landlord tenant laws, just so everyone, a little refresher, because I'm sure you guys mostly know that stuff. So what is my role as the fair housing officer? So I get in fair housing complaints, and I investigate them, taking information from both sides, any evidence as needed. And then I come to a determination, and that can lead to conciliation, or mediation between the two parties. I also do outreach into the community. I do education, as you see here. If anybody at any time needs any kind of assistance, hey, is this fair housing related? How should I handle X, Y, Z? That's what I'm here for. It doesn't matter who you are. I also help with inclusionary zoning compliance. So anybody who is mandated under that ordinance, I do the compliance for that. And then any policy recommendations as I see during my job role. So if there's anything you guys see that could use improvement, make sure to let me know as well, because that could help. I did want to quickly mention my role as a fair housing officer is to kind of be a neutral third party. I don't represent either party in a discrimination claim. I'm not an attorney. Anything said in here, you should seek legal advice elsewhere. This is just what I've come across during the time that I've been in here, my professional knowledge. Um, so my role definitely is to carry out the investigation process of a housing discrimination claim according to fair housing and human rights laws that we have. So getting into it, what is fair housing? Fair housing refers to the federal, state, and local laws that protect people from being treated unequally in housing related activities, also known as housing discrimination. Which is governed at the highest level, at the federal level, for the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Then it goes to the New York State Consolidated Laws, which is covered under the Human Rights Law, as well as some in the landlord tenant laws that protects people from being able to allow tenants to break their lease under just cause. And it also covers familial status. Albany County also has its own human rights law that covers fair housing, and then the city of Albany has omnibus human rights law as well. Some of them are a little redundant, but it's just good to know what they all are and that there's different levels to it. So who must comply with these laws? Anybody in the housing world, to be honest. It can be anybody from the owner of the house or property complex, the landlord, any leasing agents that are there, maintenance workers, anybody managing household properties, real estate agents and their brokers, mortgage lenders, developers, insurance providers who are either doing tenant, like home insurance or tenant insurance. The city of Albany, whenever we're providing housing related services, if you think of anybody providing trash, electric, water for municipal services, that's covered. Anybody who comes to fix or repair anything at the properties that you have, such as electricians, plumbers, any of that, they should also comply with fair housing laws. They could put you at a liable state if they do break any of those. So just it's good to make sure that they have that knowledge as well. So what type of housing is covered? In New York State, it's almost all types of housing, including any kind of apartments, assisted living, transitional housing, and homeless shelters. They have to be used as residents, essentially. There are a few exceptions, which is any single or two-family buildings that are owner occupied, or rooming rentals for same-sex individuals that are owner occupied as well. The other one is religious organizations or members only private clubs, such as housing exclusive for individuals who are 55 years of age or plus. Do want to say that whether you're in a single family unit or two family unit and you're owner occupied, you still have to comply with fair housing advertising requirements, which includes race and color. If you guys have any questions at all during the presentation, you can feel free to unmute yourself as well, or you can wait till the end, whatever is better for you. So what are the protected classes under fair housing? At the federal level, we have anybody with a disability, anybody because of their race, color, their sex, national origin, religion, or their familial status. And we'll go over a few of these protected classes in a little bit more depth. Under New York State and the city of Albany, there's protected classes for anybody who is over the age of 18, so age discrimination, anybody because of their immigration or citizenship status. It doesn't matter if they have what kind of documentation they have, they should be able to get housing. And because of their lawful source of income, their domestic violence victim status, their marital or domestic partner status, so who they're married to, um, and then military status and arrest record. This one, it only counts if it's related to another protected class. So let's say somebody with a disability has a hard time controlling their hand movements or something and accidentally hit somebody. There was an arrest record for that. It got dismissed, but that's on their record. You wouldn't want to deny somebody for that. So that's how that would kind of play out. Along with this, also covers sexual orientation, gender identity, and that is at the state level. So what are some actions that would be considered discriminatory? Essentially anything putting up barriers to people accessing or gaining housing or continuing staying in their housing. Some examples would be outright refusing or discouraging people from taking a unit, such as steering applicants to other buildings, requiring invasive background checks during the application process, telling people that the unit is not available even though you're showing it to other people, charging higher rents to tenants with children, failing to provide or delaying maintenance requests, such as not completing maintenance issues in order, or denying an application to a potential tenant who has an emotional support animal. Those are all ways that could be seen as violations of the Fair Housing Act. And again, we'll go a little bit more into more examples so it makes more sense. The other one that's covered at the federal level that I don't have here is retaliation. So if you retaliate against anybody because they make a fair housing complaint, that would also be covered at the federal level, and that would be considered a fair housing violation as well. But the other three are harassment, quid pro quo, and hostile environments. So sexual harassment is like the most known one, right? It refers to unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical sexual actions. And this could also include offensive remarks about someone's sex. So let's say a maintenance person came in, did some unsavory stuff, made somebody feel uncomfortable in whatever way. That would be sexual harassment, quid pro quo, unwelcome requests or demands for sexual favors in order to maintain or obtain something. This can be explicit or subtle, such as saying, I really think that I could get those fees off of um, your rental arrears if you did XYZ. And even if the tenant participates, it's still sexual harassment. So again, we really want to make sure you're hiring people that you can trust around your tenants and um, create a welcoming environment, which goes on to the hostile environments, which is a severe or pervasive harassment that interferes with the person's ability to access or live in their house. So racial slurs, exposing yourself to the tenants, derogatory comments. I would also consider that to be illegal eviction as well if you're making it so that the tenant doesn't want to live there anymore. So those are all protected classes at the federal level as well under fair housing. All right, so let's get into screening tenants and the application process. Because this is where you're gonna get the information to be able to get good tenants, be able to make sure you maintain those good tenants, and have staff that is gonna help you with that process. So that's why I always say if you're gonna rent any kind of apartments or provide housing to anybody, make sure you have trained and qualified leasing staff. This also goes with your maintenance people as well. They should know at least most of the laws, at least fair housing, and a few landlord tenant, just to make sure that you're really protecting yourself. So at a minimum, I always recommend leasing staff or anybody working with your tenants on a daily basis. They should have the New York State landlord tenant laws known, any kind of fair housing laws. They should have trauma-informed customer service experience. You have no idea how many people have mental health concerns and they get treated so poorly. There's people without mental health conditions who just like have had really hard lives, and they're not treated very well during like the application process or just trying to make sure their rent is paid on time. Which also goes into proper accounting knowledge, make sure they have the skills to be able to have solid organizational skills to be able to collect all the rent that's coming in, do the accounting for that, and make sure everybody's rent rolls are up to date and in good order. Another thing is excellent communication, so that they're able to tell tenants ahead of time, 24 hours notice that we're coming into the apartment. Hey, this is going to be happening. Make sure you're moving your cars. All this is going to create happy tenants to be able to know what's expected of them, know what to expect from you guys. That's all going to help out. And it can do attitude. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but customer service has gone down in every industry. So you want to make sure that you get staff that is going to say, I may not be able to help you with that, but let me show you who can. Or, of course, I can help you with that. Or it's not my job, but I can definitely show you who it can be. Like just somebody who is going to be able to help your tenants and get them in the right direction so that you have a good relationship with them. Because your leasing agents and the people who are with your tenants all day are your best defense to preventing fair housing violations, one, but also making sure your tenants are satisfied in the units they're there. And having trained and qualified staff are going to make sure that they can see the barriers when they arise and prevent them from happening to prevent those fair housing violations, especially during the application process. That's huge. So I always recommend when you're applicant coming in to look at apartments, you go through the screening process of make sure you're meeting with them at least 4 times during that. That's the way you're going to get to know your tenants. You're going to be showing them the property once. That is a good way, good indicator to see you're going to be renting to. Then you're going to have the application process with a questionnaire. You're going to get a little bit more information, make sure you're able to help them in the best way possible. And then you're going to meet them a 3rd time when you're going over the screening report, right? You're going to go over that background check or screening report with them. I say take the time to get to know your tenants and take the time to get to know their process and see if there's any way that you can help accommodate them. And then finally going over that lease if you decide to take them on as a tenant. Going through that lease is gonna save you so much time down the road because they're gonna know the house rules and you're gonna know that you read them the house rules and they can ask questions along the way so they're not surprised later. And they say, oh, I had no idea I had to take out the trash. I didn't know that was in the lease. A lot of that stuff will help you down the road. And make sure you have good tenants because they agreed to this whole process to be able to get the housing. All right, so when you first get a tenant who calls up and says, I seen you have this property listed, what do I do to be able to see this house? From that moment on, you should be creating guest cards. These are super important. They're good for compliance. They're tools that protect your employees and the company because it records what prospective tenants want, what they're looking for, and any questions that they had along the way. They're super useful in fair housing investigations. God forbid it came to that. To be able to say, no, this is what this person was looking for. They were looking for the 1 bedroom at this price. It just goes back in detail to show the exact process. It helps maintain consistency and thorough records of the information given to all potential residents. You must record the date and the time of each interaction, as well as the availability and price advertised. Guest cards can help eliminate complaints that stem from a prospective's perception of unequal treatment, because relying on your memory or random notes is not reliable defense in a fair housing complaint, and you want to make sure that you and your employees are covered. So this is an example of what a guest card looks like. It shows who was working with the potential resident, where was it shown, what apartment number, reasons why not, what the price range is, what they were quoted, how many times you saw them. It's just good to be able to document that because, for example, a prospective resident who's looking for a 2 bedroom unit could misinterpret that they are being discriminated against when they hear another prospective tenant being quoted a lower amount, not knowing that the other applicant is actually looking for a 1 bedroom. Another example would be if they think the leasing agent is blowing them off when they show up and they can't meet that day. But if you were to document the next available scheduled meeting that you guys had and the reason why you couldn't meet with them originally, there's no way to say that you were discriminating against them or that you were blowing them off, right? Like you had that scheduled next time, it's just you couldn't see them that day. So those definitely I think will help you out a lot just in managing applications that come in and as a fair housing perspective as well. Because you want first come, first serve of who is the most qualified, right? And if you're taking people that applied 5 days ago compared to somebody who applied 10 days ago and is very equally qualified, but one person, let's say, has disabilities and the other doesn't, it's going to look really bad on the company. All right, so HUD has 6 principles for guiding non-discriminatory screenings when you're doing a background check for tenants. So starting off with the 1, make sure you're using relevant information. You don't want to deny tenants because of their past actions that was unrelated to their tenancy or past actions that are unlikely to reoccur again, such as being evicted due to job loss. That's something that doesn't happen very often, and it shouldn't really be counted. Another thing would be criteria that should be waived if it's not relevant for the applicant's circumstances, such as checking irrelevant screening criteria, such as income information, such as verifying income verification for somebody who's not paying the rent. So let's say you have a tenant coming in, but their grandma, who's not living there or applying, is paying for the rent. So you wouldn't check the tenant's income verification, but you would check the grandma's to make sure that she can pay the tenant going forward. The next one would be all relevant income information should be used. such as if somebody has Section 8, DSS, unemployment, or Social Security, you should use that as income to be able to check if they're able to pay. Or evictions filed where the tenant prevailed. And we'll go over this a little bit more, but you shouldn't be using records that don't have a negative outcome for the eviction. So principle number 2 is using only accurate records. Like I said, screenings can be incomplete and missing a lot of key information or not updated. And there's a lot of people with similar names. So you want to make sure you have proper information to make sure you're not using Randy O'Neill, um, but the guy's name is Randy Dillard O'Neill or something like that, because it could be somebody who's living in Utah. So making sure that you have full information to make an accurate determination. Principle 3 is create and follow application screening process. So this one is important, and I say this a lot, is making sure you have an application process that is visible to your tenants or prospective tenants, either on your website or on the application that they fill out, and making sure that you're sticking to it.
So,
Principle, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So, how about those of us who don't have an application process that literally is just word of mouth? So, let's say we have a family who's living in one of our units. They hear, hey, another unit's coming available. They know someone who's looking for an apartment. Person seems great, and we just move them in. We don't really have so how does that apply if you don't have an application process?
Okay. It might not be a bad idea just to create a simple one, even if it's the process that you use, it's word of mouth, because it's not really like advertising. It's more of like, what do you do to be able to go from that tenant looking at the apartment to moving in? I think it's good to always have a strict process that you follow so that nothing gets lost in the sauce, essentially.
hmm So most of our tenants come to us, actually all of our tenants come to us through word of mouth. It might be through another organization. It might be through one of the tenants we already have. It could be, I mean, that's actually pretty much how all of our tenants come to us. So there's really not much of an application process. We don't do background checks. We don't ask for income verification because a lot of our tenants um don't have that documentation necessarily.
So you're a smaller landlord then that doesn't really have like a policy or procedure handbook kind of thing.
Um, I don't know that I'd say that we're necessarily small. It's just the tenants that we bring in, the families that we bring in tend to come to us just all through word of mouth or again through other organizations.
Yeah, because even if that is what you're doing, it might be good just to put in the books that that's your policy of you hear from somebody that might be interested in it through word of mouth. You, do you check income, I'm guessing?
We do not.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's just go from word of mouth to signing the lease?
Basically, so we like to have a third party person involved. That's why, like, if it's word of mouth,
Mhm.
we like to have someone who can support that family in some way, not necessarily financially, but maybe, hey, you brought this family to us and they're looking for some kind of support, whatever. Like if we're having an issue with that tenant, that third party person can step in
Like a
and help us.
co-signer?
No, they're not co-signers. It's really hard to explain how it is that we function here at our organization.
Okay.
So, some of our tenants, they don't even speak English. So, for example, hey, their rent's 3 weeks late. We're trying to figure out what's going on. Do they need some sort of assistance? Is something happening? Are they sick? Is, whatever the case may be, we'll ask that third party person who speaks both languages potentially to step in and help us. So we always like to have a third party person who can help us navigate any sort of wraparound issues, so to speak.
And in that situation, you may not need to put policies on the books then or anything like that. If it sounds like you're doing a lot to make sure to prevent barriers from them maintaining their housing and getting housing. So that's actually great as well.
Okay. Yeah, we do because we've had tenants where, for example, we had a tenant, she was in the hospital for a few weeks and we went out of our way to find another organization that could help her. pay her rent for that month. So we really do make sure to do things like that.
Yeah, and that's great.
So,
That's
okay.
actually a good segue into accommodations, which we'll get into soon, is that if
Okay.
you see that happening, that's a good thing to do. Yep.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know we were allowed to ask questions.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
in a two, well, I thought we'd have to wait to the end. Are we going to get a copy of this presentation?
yeah, so I tried to put it in the chat before everyone got here, but I don't know if it's stuck there. So go ahead and put your email
Okay.
in, and then I can just send it to everybody at the
Well,
end.
can you just email it to anybody who signed up, like you emailed out the.
I could do that as well. Yep. I just sent it to like 70 plus people, so I wasn't sure if everybody wanted to get that.
Yeah. I'll put my email in.
Perfect.
So I have two questions. So if a landlord is verifying income, like someone else is going to pay the rent, wouldn't that someone else need to be on the lease?
If that is your procedure, yeah. I'm just from a perspective of you don't need
So
to.
what, like you have no recourse if you don't have them on the lease, right?
Yeah, and you definitely could. I'm just more addressing that you don't want to deny somebody for income verification that isn't going to be paying the rent. That's all.
Okay. And then, so the exceptions to all this fair housing laws, if it's a two-family owner occupied,
One or two
they're
family owner occupied. Yep.
so they're exempt from everything you've just talked about.
Except race and color um, advertising requirements.
So if they have a tenant who decides to all of a sudden adopt three children, you can say, I live here and I'm going to charge you X amount of dollars for these extra kids.
Depends on what your lease says, but you could as long as your lease allows that.
Uh, that's so, but there's an exception here, right? The lease doesn't say anything about children. The lease is,
Yeah, but if you have like a year contract for a certain amount, you can't just like raise the rent because there's kids moving in. That's all.
okay, but if you have a lease that,
You're outside the lease or month to month or renewing. Yeah.
yeah, if it's a month-to-month lease and the original lease said that you can't move anybody in without written notification to the landlord, is that them then breaking the lease?
It might be, yeah. And that could be grounds for a lease violation. Yeah.
Okay.
So principle 4 is being transparent with your applicants, providing applications with a copy of the screening policies or telling them where to find them on your website is great for those of you who need to do that. You want to let them know which records will be considered during that screening, what incidents will disqualify them, and how far back the screenings will look. Informing your tenants how they will be screened could prevent them from wasting money on the application fees for a unit they know they won't be qualified for. It also saves your time, and transparency is important throughout the application process. So the applicants know how they will be screened and why they were denied afterwards. So you really want to make sure you're providing that detailed letter or even going over it with them on the phone, saying you were denied due to such reason. You must have this satisfactory in order to get it, and we used this service, or this is where we got your background check from. So principle 5 is challenging their report. So if a housing provider is using a screening, like a third-party screening report, federal law requires the landlord to provide notice to the tenants of the reason the action was denied, also known as the adverse action notice. It should be given either written, orally, or electronically, and it should provide them with the name of the contact person for the company that you used for the report. It should be given for free up to 60 days. And it should let the applicant know where they can dispute any inaccurate information. You also want, if you are using a third-party screening tool, to make sure that that tool is customizable so you can change the criteria, the standards, and it's not just an off-the-shelf project. That way you can help ensure screenings conform to the policies that you have and allow to break down those barriers when they do arise in certain situations that would violate fair housing. And lastly, principle 6 is if you have these policies or models, make sure that you're testing them. Screening companies and AI may produce disparate outcomes, meaning that policies may unintentionally harm some people, even if the policy appears like it's equal for everybody. So as we know, some marginalized populations, just due to the system that we have, get treated poorly in different areas, such as credit and some other areas, which we'll go into next. So make sure you're running tests to make sure that it's fair and equitable, and that you're not accidentally putting up barriers for some people that you're not really aware of. So getting into a few things you just want to go over a little more, even if you do use a screening tool report with your own eyes, is the credit history. Use only accurate information, as we said before. Do take into consideration that some populations of color have lower credit scores due to the system that we have in place. And it's not always an accurate indicator of somebody's ability to pay. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that and being a little more lenient with it. There is the grantor program that New York State did allow. If you do have tenants that don't quite meet the credit score criteria you're looking for, which is usually like 650, 700, they can get essentially insurance for that security deposit. So if there's any rent unpaid at the end of the tenancy or anything like that, you should be able to get your money back from this grantor program. So that's always good to protect you, and it protects the resident as well. Another one to just go over with a fine-tooth comb is criminal records. You don't want to deny an applicant with a criminal record without first considering the nature and severity of the conviction, how old the record was, and any efforts for rehabilitation since the conviction. Again, disproportionately impacts people with disabilities and those who are Black and brown. So some examples could be a housing provider refuses to rent a prospective tenant because of they were incarcerated for drug possession, but it was 25 years ago. So it's not really relevant anymore. The record has been cleaned. They obviously haven't done it anymore. Another one could be a survivor of domestic violence is denied housing due to a misdemeanor property damage conviction, even though the conviction was related to her domestic violence and she had paid for the damages. So that would be, you want to take that off the record and not consider that in your screening. Another one would be a person with a criminal record who is denied due to a past drug or alcohol addiction, even though they have successfully completed a rehabilitation program. So again, this is why it's important to go through those screening denials with the tenant so they can say, hey, just so you know, this happened a long time ago and I've been in treatment for it, because that would help take down those barriers and prevent fair housing violations as well. So lastly would be eviction history is something you want to go over too, separate from whatever the screening said. because eviction records can vary depending on when it was filed and the resolution of the eviction. Again, evictions disproportionately affect Black and Hispanic renters, women, family with children's, and individuals with disabilities. In certain circumstances, it would be particularly problematic to hold a passive eviction against a tenant, for example, who the eviction was filed against them for retaliation or in retaliation for asserting their rights, such as filing a fair housing claim or calling codes to be able to get issues fixed within the apartment. Another thing is an eviction that is due to an underlying experience of domestic violence should not be held against the survivor. Also, reasonable accommodations may be necessary in the eviction if the due to the eviction and it was related to that person's disability was the reason that they got evicted. Also, would be something such as an eviction for delinquent payment of rent because of the timing that their SSI or SSD payment came in, or if they had a medical emergency. So that's great that you had mentioned that before, saying that the family had a medical emergency, and you were able to get them help because it's something outside of their control. They're usually good tenants. It's just some things, things come up. And when it comes to SSI and SSD payments, if you see anybody getting that, it's great to just offer that accommodation right away and saying, if your income comes in at this date, let's move the due date for rent to this date instead. That way there's no, you know you're gonna get that money at that date and you don't have to worry about late fees and all that stuff as well. Another thing I recommend during the tenant screening process, if you do this, is tenant references. Don't just do one reference, do two or three. This can save you because if there are tenants, again, there are some tenants that go from provider to provider, causing chaos. It's not all of them, but there are a few that do that. So I always say get 2 to 3 references back if possible. Don't make it mandatory, but if you can, and don't call the tenant or the sorry, the landlord they're currently with, but the one prior, because if they're having issues with the current housing provider, that could be a problem for you down the line if the current housing provider is just trying to get rid of them. So I always say at least get 2 to 3 references. Don't make it mandatory, but it could save you down the line. One of those protected classes, like we talked about, is familial status, which covers families with children under the age of 18, any person who is pregnant, any person in the process of getting custody, including adoptive or fostering, and then persons with written permissions of a parent or the legal guardian, such as somebody staying with their grandma. Some examples of familial status discrimination could look like refusing to rent to families with children, evicting families once a child joins the family, either through birth, adoption, or custody, requiring families with children to live on specific floors or in certain buildings, denying a family to live in a unit due to untreated lead concerns. And we'll get into that a little bit more of how that affects lead and mold and how that becomes a fair housing issue. The next one is going back to source of income.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question on the previous slide
Yeah.
about the refusing to rent to families with children.
Mhm.
So sometimes we've never done this, but I'm really curious how this works. Like,
Yeah.
so some of the families that come to us, they'll have 10 kids. Literally have 10 children, and it's a 2-bedroom apartment. So you have 12 people in a 2-bedroom apartment in in a building that's not made to handle that many people. What do you, and I'm curious because we do have a family. They have, the mom and the dad, they have 4 kids. They have the mom, then they have the high school sister, and then they moved in some brothers. mean, technically they're all related, but now we have 15 people in an apartment and it just causes so much wear and tear on the building. I mean, they're great tenants. It's not necessarily an issue, but like, what do you do when you have families of 12, 13, 14 people? Like, at what point do you say, like, is there a law or something on the books that says this is a two-bedroom apartment? We aren't allowed to have X number of people in here. I'm just really curious, where do you draw the line with these large families?
Yeah, for
Because it
sure.
does happen, and there are a lot of large families out there.
And that's a great question because there's two different things here. So from the fair housing perspective, anybody under the age of 18 in that family can't be turned away. So that's one
Okay.
thing. So if it's aunt and uncle, they're not covered under familial status.
I see.
But two, when it comes to New York State occupancy requirements, that is the responsibility of the landlord to make sure that the tenants are abiding by that, and that can be a lease violation. And that is covered. I want to say it starts with two people per bedroom, but it's by square footage. So it
S-
depends on how many square feet, but I think it starts off at like 100 square feet and goes up from there, and children under one don't count.
So
Do you
this
have
applies
information?
to, so this applies to everyone in the house, including all the children. It's technically two per room or whatever that square footage is.
Yeah, so
So,
New York State law is exactly what that
so
is.
what do you do when you have a mom and a dad, right? And then they have 10 kids. They're all under 18, but who has a building big enough to house people two per room?
It's hard. Yeah, you gotta
So
find
where do
the
you,
ones that are like
so what happens, like, let's say, heaven forbid, there's a fire or something,
Mhm.
and, you know, the Albany Fire Department shows up and they're like, why do you have 12 people living in here? You're like, well, most of them are under the age of 18. You have all these kids. Like, what do you do? Because nobody wants
There's
to get in
there's
trouble,
there's
you
code
know?
enforcement. You have to look up your code enforcement. You can't just have a bunch of people living in a space. And I
Yeah,
don't think we can answer your question here.
do the
Just like you got
calculation.
to find, you
Yeah,
can't have a two-bedroom with 15 people in it. There's code enforcement, there's certificate of occupancy. I mean, it's beyond just this.
yeah,
There's
that's
like
why it's
regulations.
hard. Yeah, definitely look up the New York State laws of occupancy maximums and then go from there and contact somebody for help for that. Um, Moving on to sorts of income discrimination. So as housing providers should accept all sources of a lawful income. And that includes anybody receiving any kind of disability, housing vouchers, child support, alimony, unemployment, veterans benefits. And that also includes any one-time payments and emergency payments. Um, and Housing vouchers, like Section 8 and stuff like that. Again, going back to if a tenant is not 100% paying, and you have a Section 8 voucher that pays 100% of the rent, the tenant's ability to pay the rent has already been made by the voucher agency. So you don't need to do any credit or history checks there to be able to check if they're going to pay. Obviously, still make sure you're asking about income and including the source of where that income is coming from and documentation to make sure everything is accurate. But just making sure you're including that income and accepting all forms of income for your verification process. So this is actually a housing provider in the area that was saying specifically they are not accepting any Section 8 DSS SSI. And they thought because if their rent was so high that they could put that in there and it would be fine. But the realization was that some people could actually afford that with their Section 8 because they had 5 kids or whatever the case was. But either way, you should let them go through the verification process and not put up front an advertising that you don't accept it. Because again, it's creating those barriers and telling people to not come here essentially, which is discriminatory. So when it does come to advertising and marketing requirements under the Fair Housing Act, anything again that puts up those barriers in print, publishing, or any kind of advertisement that has a preference, limitation, or is blatantly discriminatory based off of someone's protected class is prohibited. And that again includes newspapers, directories, publications, any kind of websites, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. What I do suggest for housing providers is that you do use either the statement here that says this home does not discriminate based on the races of, and then it goes on, or you use in the right-hand corner the or housing opportunity logo, and that one is by HUD. These two will protect you or at least help you if there is a fair housing discrimination case in the future. Again, assuming that you are following the practices and policies of fair housing as well. So down below, you see a few of these statements that have been taken out of advertisements for housing. There are 3 of them that are discriminatory, which is having a preference for white-only families, saying nobody with a wheelchair is allowed to use the house, and having a preference or suggesting that it's a Christian home only. So the main takeaway when you're advertising your apartments is to make sure that you're being inclusive rather than restrictive. And then housing providers under New York State law are required to provide notice to all tenants about their right for reasonable accommodations and modifications for people living with disabilities. This notice must be provided within 30 days of the tenancy or 30 days of finding out that this law exists. It must be in 12-point font or larger. And it must include the telephone number, pretty much the contact information, who's accepting these reasonable accommodations. And oral notice or posting in common areas does not satisfy the requirement under the subsection. So just make sure you're putting this notice as a part of your application process or onboarding process. All right, so getting into disabilities. What is disability under the Fair Housing Law? It's anybody with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of their major life activities. It could be somebody who has a history of such impairment or somebody who is even perceived as having such impairment. When it comes to the definition of major life activities, that could be anybody who has difficulties walking, speaking, hearing, seeing, working, learning, performing manual tasks, or even caring for themselves. 2 things that are not covered under the definition of disability is somebody who's currently using drugs, somebody who is a threat to the health and safety of others, or causes substantial damage to the property without mitigating it first, without being able to remedy it. So somebody who is currently in rehabilitation for drug use is covered under the definition of a disability, just not somebody who is currently using. So living with mental health conditions, did I skip one? No, okay. So somebody who's living with a mental health condition or intellectual or developmental disabilities, just want to make sure that you know mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It affects our interpersonal communications, which is why I said that housing staff should get trained in trauma-informed service providing, because it also determines how we handle stress and relate to others and how we make our choices. So when we get stressed, we all act in different ways. Some of us who have mental health conditions may act a little bit different than others. In those circumstances, we want to make sure we're aware of that and we can be able to regulate ourselves and still help the person in front of us. Some barriers to housing for people who have mental health conditions might, again, be somebody who has difficulty caring for themselves, having difficulty filling out paperwork, not being able to show up to leasing stuff on time, somebody having anxiety about people entering their homes or not being told when people are coming. It could be social isolation, hoarding, not trusting other people in your home, like I mentioned, needing support animals, or needing supportive assistance or like a home care aid. So just some things to think about if you do encounter these is think first, like, does this person need help? They're not really meaning to have any kind of issues or anything like that. So reasonable accommodations and modifications. What is a reasonable accommodation? So it's any kind of adjustment of rules, policies, or procedures that the housing provider provides. These adjustments are the responsibility of the housing provider. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me with those. Unfortunately, that is the main part of my role is dealing with people, with their reasonable accommodations, what is allowable, what is not, and getting the paperwork and documentation. And that is one of the documents that I'm going to be providing to you in the email is a list that HUD sent over of examples of accommodations that are approved. So you kind of know ahead of time if somebody asks for it, you can look on the list and see. But some examples you'll see here is allowing the tenants to have a live-in aid or allowing them that second bedroom. Changing the rent due date based off of the time they get their disability income. Leniency for behaviors that would typically violate a lease. Allowing service animals or emotional support animals despite having a no pet policy. Taking out the garbage to the dumpster or grabbing their mail might be another one as well. What are reasonable modifications? So those are structural changes that allow someone with a disability to safely and freely enjoy their home. These modifications are the financial responsibility of the person with the disability, and you as a housing provider can require that the work is done by a professional and that there are permits. And when the person leaves the home, that the home is prepared to what it was before they made that modification. So some examples would be widening door frames, installing a ramp, lowering the height of cabinets, installing a chairlift, replacing audio doorbells with a light-up doorbell, stuff like that. And I do want to say that the city does have a program for tenants who do need financial funding for that. So if you have somebody that comes to you who needs these modifications, make sure to refer them over to us if they live in the city of Albany, and they might be able to get funding to get those modifications completed. So what's considered reasonable in these reasonable accommodations and modifications? So it's the changes are not allowed to impose an undue financial administrative burden on the housing provider, and it would not fundamentally alter the services that you guys are already providing or like the operations, such as substantial modifications to or the elimination of essential lease or program requirements, requiring the owner to provide supportive services that fall outside of the scope, such as counseling, medical, or social services, or requiring the owner to offer housing of a different nature than the type of housing that the owner does offer, such as supportive housing. Things to consider when deciding if the accommodation or modification is reasonable is, does the housing provider have the resources? Again, for accommodations, it should be very little financial if there is any. The other thing is, how much will the accommodation or modification cost? Will the accommodation or modification directly benefit the person with the disability? And are there less expensive alternative options? Who can request these accommodations and modifications? It's anybody with a disability or anybody on their behalf at any time during the residency or before they move in. The request does not have to be a specific form. It can be orally, written, any of that would be fine. However, it should confirm that the person with a disability has that disability defined under the fair housing law that we talked about, and that the requested accommodation or modification is necessary because of their disability to fully enjoy their home like everyone else. So what kind of documentation is needed for this? You can ask for proof of disability if the disability is not already apparent or you don't already have prior knowledge of it. Proof would look like a letter from a medical or social service provider, or it could even be somebody who has knowledge of the disability and they know what accommodation is required for that tenant. However, please avoid asking any questions about the nature or extent of the disability. The most that you're gonna know is that they have a disability and that they need that accommodation. Even when doctors write their notes, that's all they're gonna say, but you're never gonna, or at least you shouldn't know what the actual disability is in itself. So you can't ask how long they've been using the wheelchair or why they receive any kind of disability payments or if they're able to complete certain tasks on their own. So when you do deny a reasonable request, there are a few reasons why you can deny, and it goes back to the first slide that we had is, does it create an undue financial and administrative burden to the housing provider, such as asking for a rent reduction, because they are well, like their social security payments stopped essentially, and they ask you for a rent reduction. That would be unreasonable. Number two is if it fundamentally changes the type of service that you provide, such as asking the housing provider to pick up medication or clean the apartment. Or number three is the request must be related to that disability. So somebody can't be requesting to widen the door frames because of their anxiety unless that's a valid reason for it. Some reasons to not deny an accommodation would be because it's going to look bad or because everyone else will want the same thing. It's not fair to the other tenants, or there is a small cost involved. Those are some things that I've heard from housing providers in the past, and they're just not valid enough to deny a reasonable request. If there are other tenants that are wanting the same thing, they have to go through the same process in order to get that reasonable accommodation or modification met as well. So going back to who pays for these accommodations, that would be the housing provider. For accommodations, it could be including waiving any kind of assistance animal fees or deposits, waiving fees for breaking the lease due to a disability, fees for changing to another unit related to their disability, and none of these can be called administrative fees. When it comes to modifications, the tenants will cover that portion, unless the modification is to a common area that all tenants would use. If the building receives any kind of federal financial assistance, or if the building was built for first occupancy and it has to meet the new construction requirements. And then I included lead and mold in the home as well, because that can lead to a fair housing violation when it affects a tenant's health by causing or worsening their health condition. It's strongly recommended to bring a person in to be able to get it tested, such as Albany County or a private company that specializes in mold and lead. They will be able to determine what levels are there, if they're potentially dangerous or if it can affect somebody's disability. Failing to address these concerns appropriately could escalate the situation again to a fair housing complaint, adding legal and reputational risks. So I always recommend people document the process as soon as they hear anything about lead or mold, especially related to a disability. It strengthens your documentation to be able to cover yourself in case anything were to happen. So you should make sure to record the initial complaint, what the issue is, how it's making them sicker, document what the accommodation process was, where you're trying to help them, and Include the report from any party that you use to get the lead or mold tested. Any efforts to fix the issues and any issues or communication with the resident after. All right, so a little pop quiz. Let's see if I can get it up here. If you're able, I put up a little poll about accommodations and modifications if you guys just want to see which ones you think are reasonable accommodations covered under Fair Housing and which ones are reasonable modifications covered under the Fair Housing Act. All right, so all of these reasonable accommodations are covered under the Fair Housing Act. So the allowing extra time to clean an apartment due to hoarding, again, as long as it's related to the disability. Supplying a lease application in larger print. And when it comes to modifications, providing an interpreter for, oh, number 3 for accommodations was not actually. Providing an interpreter for a tenants association meeting is not required, but if it was a management meeting for the tenants, then you would be required to provide an interpreter. I knew there was one in there, I couldn't find it. And then all of the modifications are considered reasonable. All right, moving into assistance and service animals in housing. Assistance animals are covered under the Fair Housing Act. It's defined as any animal that works or provides assistance or performs a task for the benefit of the person with the disability, and they are not considered a pet. So the housing provider must receive a request by the person with the disability or on their behalf that states the disability-related need for the animal. Again, if it's not apparent. So going back to the accommodation rules is essentially what that is. Housing providers may not approve the request if there's an undue financial burden. I would say something if there's like a horse that you guys need to now house, that would be outside of the financial burden and change the nature of what you guys are providing. So we don't see that one too often, but I could see that is one that would be an example. And then the other one that you may not approve the request is if the animal poses a direct threat to others or physical damage that cannot be reduced and eliminated. And that is the key factor there, is you have to give them the opportunity to reduce or eliminate any unwanted behaviors first with the assistance animals. Service animals is covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's defined specifically as any dog that is trained to do work or perform a task related to the person's disability. For this one, again, you can ask if the dog is a service animal required for that disability, what work or task the dog has been trained to perform. However, you cannot ask for documentation that the dog is registered, licensed, or certified, or require that the dog demonstrate its task or ask about the person's disability related to the service animal. Can any restrictions be placed on assistance animals? Yes. Reasonable restrictions would be local leash laws. The animal has to be vaccinated, and you have to pick up and after your animal. Some restrictive, excessive restrictions would be prohibiting animals in common areas. If the tenant is allowed to go in those areas, so should the animal. Forcing animals to leave the property to relieve itself would be restrictive. Any kind of strict no barking policies. Barking is going to happen a little bit, and they should be able to have a chance again to mitigate any excessive barking. And you can't put any breed, size, or weight restrictions on service or assistance animals. Again, if there is an exception, though, if the animal poses a direct threat that cannot be eliminated or reduced, or that undue financial burden, or fundamentally changes the service that you're providing. Victim of domestic violence status is a protected class. We'll go over that quickly because there's a few New York state laws about it. So domestic violence victim status is anybody over the age of 18 who experiences any kind of domestic violence. It could be somebody who is a current or former intimate partner of the abuser. They are currently living with them or previously lived with them. They share a child in common. Any of that could be considered victim of domestic violence, and they are protected at the state level under the human rights law. So we can't be discriminating against somebody who is a domestic violence victim. And that is with the terms, conditions, privileges of the rental or any advertisement, just like any of the other protected classes. And then landlord-tenant law under New York State has an additional protection that says if you do discriminate against a victim of domestic violence, that you could be fined plus punitive damages, and you could be convicted of a misdemeanor. So you just want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence on that one. People who are domestic violence victims are allowed to terminate their lease early without having to pay the rest of their lease. The conditions for that is they must provide you with a termination date no sooner than 30 days from the date they're giving you the notice. They must state that they are experiencing the domestic violence as a tenant and can no longer remain there safely. And they must provide documentation verifying the status, as well as if there's any prepaid rent, like let's say they paid a year in advance, that would all have to be given back within 10 days. And any security deposit should not be withheld or deducted from for using protections under New York state law. This one doesn't really pertain to housing providers, but if you do have a tenant who is experiencing domestic violence and trying to flee quickly, you should know to be able to help them, that they're also covered under utility service protections, under New York state law as well, to be able to get out of their utility service contracts within 7 days. They must go through the same procedure of just letting the company know what's going on And they can't require them to maintain a separate account, or notify, anybody else on the account as well. All right, so we're done with the fair housing portion, just going over a few brief landlord tenant laws. Make sure everybody has a rental occupancy permit. This is where codes goes in, make sure the unit is up to standard for people to be able to live there. You register once and it's good for 24 months and it must be renewed every 24 months. And you're not allowed to retaliate against a tenant for bringing any code violations that are unfixed. Your responsibility as a housing provider is to make sure everything is in proper condition under the City of Albany ordinance, such as any furnishing of heat and hot water. Want to make sure your stoves and all that stuff is in proper condition. You're posting the maximum number of occupants permitted. Your premises is clean, safe, and in sanitary conditions, and that's common areas like hallways, and outside, making sure you're maintaining plumbing, heating, electrical equipment, like I said, any fixtures. They should be in good sanitary condition, maintaining any walls, floors, and ceilings, like I said, in those public areas, and keeping exits free and clear. Those are your responsibility as housing providers. And again, it helps you maintain good tenants who want to stay there as well. Make sure you are providing 24-hour notice if you are going to be entering the tenant's home for any kind of repairs at a minimum. This is something that I see often, is that tenants are complaining about the 24-hour notice just being disregarded. So make sure you're doing that. The legal rights for entry is any kind of inspections that you need done, routine maintenance, or if there's emergencies, you don't need the notice, and that would be specifically if there's smoke, water, or gas leaking out of the apartment. Penalties for illegally entering could be court injunctions, cost of damages, and breaking the lease in special occasions.
I have a question.
And then if you, just one sec, if you have a tenant who is not letting you into the apartment, that constitutes as a lease violation and a grounds to break the lease on your behalf and take them to court for an eviction as well. Go ahead.
I don't find this stuff funny because I have a tenant that's being extremely difficult, not letting me in, telling me I can only come Monday through Friday between 9 to 5. But and I give 48 hours notice. So what is this Monday through Friday 9 to 5?
It should be during reasonable hours as well as the other part of it.
Okay.
Is it that you can't find people to do it during Monday through Friday?
Well, okay, so if I can be there at 6 p.m., that's reasonable.
And they won't let you do that?
No.
Yeah, you might want to, if you have an attorney, to speak with them to see if you might be able to start the eviction process if they're being unreasonable like that.
And telling me that I can't clean my windows on the inside because the windows are flipped in so that you can release them, fold them in, wash the windows and put them, back so you're not doing it from the outside. Telling me I can't, I can wash the windows from the outside, like telling me how to maintain my building.
Yeah, that one might be a little bit more of a tricky one.
Why?
Because it's not like just replacing or fixing something, it's going in and cleaning it. Was that a part of, it might be if it was a part of your contract, but I might,
Cleaning windows is a maintenance item. Like
yeah.
this is the city of Albany, and windows, if they're not cleaned on a regular basis, will get to a point where they can't be cleaned. There's like, it's a reasonable request. And also, so I don't agree that that's not a maintenance item. It is, like, if you look it up, that is a maintenance item. And it's also, keeping the building healthy.
It might be worth adding to your lease too, going forward, of saying this is something we're going to do regularly so they know to expect it, and it would be violating the lease if they don't let you in to do it.
And what about changing the locks without notifying the landlord?
Tenants should be doing that, and if they change it, they have to provide you a copy.
They haven't, and it's so, when they break their lease, do we have to give them the ability to fix and comply?
I mean, there's a reasonable time frame to be able to do that, yeah, on both ends, to be able to remedy the situation first.
Mhm.
Yeah. Usually it's like that 14-day area. And I'm sorry,
Okay.
I didn't mean to laugh. I was trying to get that out there. That's why I
Yeah,
was.
no, I have a very difficult
Yeah, no, it sounds like.
situation. I've been a landlord for 22 years, so I mean, everything that you just spewed out, no offense, I mean, I'm very fully aware of, but this is the second tenant that's telling me, reasonable. Like, no, I'm sorry, reasonable might be coming in on Saturday at 11 o'clock when you're off at the farmer's market. That I'm going to do something. That is not unreasonable if I give you 48 hours notice.
Yeah, and the other question, which obviously you don't want to bring up yourself, is if there is like mental health concerns or like prior PTSD, and that's why they're concerned about it, but that's something they should,
No,
I guess.
not that situation.
Yeah.
No. The other thing is, the homeowner is disabled and may have to move a family member in, so may have to give notice that, they have to move a family member in, and this, the tenant will have to leave. What's the process there?
If it's a lease that's ending or if it's month to month, you would just follow that procedure of handling it like that, but make sure you're providing the good cause notice with it.
Well, handling like what? What do you mean handling
Like
like
the
that?
eviction process, just like I'm not renewing your lease if that's the case, and giving the proper notification depending how long they've been there, which I think is going to be coming up in a slide or two.
Oh, okay.
So this is a good document that I suggest people use for that 24-hour notice because it goes into detail, um, letting tenants know when somebody's coming into the house to fix something. Lease renewals, here we go, under New York State. So if you are increasing the rent more than 5% at lease renewals, or you do not intend to renew the lease, um, you have to go by the scale they have here. If they've been in the house or have a lease for less than 1 year, you have to give them 30 days notice. If they have been in the unit for a year or have a contract for a year, you have to give them 60 days notice. And if they have been there for 2 or plus years, you have to give them 90 days notice that you intend to not renew their lease or increase the rent more than 5%.
And what if they don't leave?
Then you would start the eviction process after that.
So a month to month, but I thought you had to have good cause. See, this is very
We'll get
confusing.
into that one in a second as well.
Okay, but if it's a month to month, the lease is already
So it just
done.
depends on how long they've lived there then. If it's been less than a year, 30 days. If it's been a year, 60 days. And more than that would be 90 days
So
notice.
I agree, Patty, that that the lease renewals, it is very difficult because a lot of our leases, actually all of our leases are month to month. We had a very difficult tenant. He wasn't paying his rent. In all of our years, we've only had to evict one tenant, and we still had to go through an eviction process, even though we're like, hey, we're not renewing your lease. It wasn't that simple. So how do you go about renewing a lease when it's month to month and you don't want to renew it? It still seems like there's something in those good cause laws which makes it difficult to be like, well, sorry, we're not renewing your lease. It doesn't seem to be that easy.
So you
Mhm.
have to, and that's why I recommend that you put specific lease violations in the lease like the house rules essentially of what you would like to see your tenants do within reason, obviously. So that way, if those issues come up, that you can issue those lease violations, and those are a good cause under the law to be able to evict somebody.
So you
Yeah.
still have to have a good cause to not renew their lease.
Correct, with the good cause in place in the city of Albany.
So let's say you just need the tenants out just because they're troublesome in general, but you have to prove basically that they've done X, Y, Z, and that's why you're not renewing their lease.
Correct. Which is why those lease violations come in handy because it's written proof that you've given them notice to remedy something and they haven't.
So in
When
in
you
your
say,
so in the lease you should say if you pay your rent late twice, that's grounds for, or because I say twice because things happen, or I don't even know what else you would put in there. Because how do you prove, oh, my tenant was rude to me, or in Patty's case, maybe she puts in there something like, if you put locks on your doors, you change your locks, you have to provide a copy. If you don't, that's grounds for eviction unless XYZ
well, the
happens.
lease does have in there, you can't make alterations without written consent from the landlord. And this individual has changed
Oh,
out the temperature
yeah.
gauge, the thermostat and the front door lock, and telling me that I only need one access into the house. That's what she uses the word investigator. But
Hmm.
besides that, I may not even, this may all go away in the sense that the homeowner is very, very, very disabled, very disabled. Legally disabled, on DSS themselves, the homeowner. Okay, I'm representing the homeowner because I'm her sister. And I may need to move in there. Now, this person, I'm going to give her a notice of 60 days that she needs to be out because a family member is moving in. Am I going to have a problem? Because she's already shown herself to be a problem.
Yeah, unfortunately that does happen. But that should be covered under good cause to be able to move a family member in there for cause of eviction. So
But what if they don't leave? Then what happens?
you go through the eviction process. You take them to court, do the eviction, show your good cause in court, and they issue that warrant of eviction that goes to the sheriff's office to remove the person.
And do they have to pay the rent while they're going through this process?
Yeah, up until the day that they're supposed to be vacated from the property.
Okay. Because I'm just very concerned because um that's probably the path I'm going to have to go down.
Fortunately, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, of course. Yeah, there's problems on both sides, and I get that.
So, the problem is, and again, I've been a landlord for 22 years. I have a tenant that I've had for 22 years. I have a tenant that I've had for 10 years. I have a tenant that will write me a reference. I've had other tenants for 2 and 3 years spits because of the location of the property. They end up buying a home. I am very strict about who I rent to and yada, 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 in the sense that I make sure they have good credit, and I've rented to people that have had terrible credit, but everybody has to have a place to live. But this is unreasonable, telling me that I can't come in except Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's not acceptable. And, you know, I, it's very stressful. So no, good cause eviction is not fair. I'm very upset that the city of Albany applied that to a single two-family unit. I'm not some landlord baron here.
Yeah, but it does sound like separately from good cause, they're breaking New York state law as well, and you should be able to start the eviction process based on them not letting you in either.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm sorry you're going through that though.
Thank you.
So under New York state law, you're obligated to provide rent receipts. I think most people do that, but it's a good reminder. It not only protects you to make sure that your office knows what rent is coming in and being paid, but it also helps the tenants be reassured that you receive their rent as well. Tenants paying personal check may request in writing a rent receipt from the landlord. The receipt must state the date, amount paid, and the period for which the rent was paid and what apartment number. And it must be signed by the person receiving it. If a tenant requests a receipt one time, the landlord must provide a receipt every month going after. Make sure to keep those for up to 3 years, which again is it's good for you as well in case you were to have to take anybody to court. Late fees, rent paid more than 5 days after the due date is considered late, and housing providers can charge a late fee after the fifth day. That is either $50 or 5% of the monthly rent, whichever is lesser, and then make sure you're providing notices of late rent and that there will be a late fee charged. That again is good proof for you in court that you provided that notice of it being late, and it also notifies your tenant so they know they're late as well. Good cause eviction, like we touched on, it mandates that if you are renewing a lease or failing to renew a lease, you're required to provide that notice of good cause. There's exemptions under this law for what units are not eligible under this, so make sure you're checking that. The type of housing matters because you may not be under good cause depending on the type of housing. And the definition of good cause varies as well. Like we've talked about, the non-payment of rent is a good cause for eviction. Having lease violations, tenants failing to sign that new lease, and or using it for personal use or removing it from the market altogether. And lastly, retaliation. We talked about at the fair housing level, you should not be retaliating against somebody who makes a fair housing complaint, but also anybody who makes a good faith complaint to any agency is also prohibited. Anything that would be considered a retaliation or may be considered is if you bring an eviction against a tenant within 1 year of them making that complaint, altering the terms of the rental, failing to renew the lease suddenly, or putting in unreasonable conditions or a rent increase. So that was it. Thank you for bearing with me. I know it was a lot. Hopefully you got a little bit of new information out of it. Do you guys have any questions at all?
Where would I find information on the laws surrounding the number of people allowed in a unit, for example?
Occupancy standards? Yeah. Did you put your email in the chat?
I did.
I'll go ahead and I'll include that in the with the documents as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I'm here as a resource for you guys as well, so let me know. And thanks for attending.